I'm Yao Wu, Curator of Asian Art at the Smith College Museum of Art. I'm very happy to be joined by Zheng Bo, an eco-conceptualist artist based in Hong Kong, who also teaches at the School of Creative Media at the City University of Hong Kong. Zheng Bo was a leader in residence at the Louis Global Studies Center this semester, and his residency was originally scheduled for early April, but we had to postpone his visit to Smith due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm very happy here to have him virtually with us and to speak with us about his art and practice. So welcome, Bo, first.
Nice to see you.
I would like to talk a little bit about the connections you see between the artistic and political messages expressed in your art and this current global crisis we're experiencing. So first of all, you are obviously very fascinated with plants and particularly weeds. How did this fascination come about? And what do you think of human interactions with other species? And has this pandemic further prompted you to consider our relationship with invisible organisms such as bacteria and viruses?
So it's really nice to talk to you online. You may know I was actually an undergraduate student at Amherst College 20 some years ago. When I was there, I majored in fine arts and I was fascinated by portrait paintings. So my graduate project was a series of portraits. Since I left college, I was, for a long time, I was fascinated by human activities. I spent almost 10 years working on socially engaged projects, collaborating with communities. But something happened about 7 years ago. I moved from northern China to southern China. So my own living environment changed. And I was teaching in a city called Hangzhou. And I noticed there are beautiful trees in front of the art school. And I was invited to create a project in the same year in Shanghai. Shanghai is a huge city, but when I was invited to create a work in this particular location, I saw a beautiful patch of weeds in the center of the city because the city was transforming itself by moving factories out of the city. Like many major cities now around the world, industrial factories are pushed out of the cities. Cultural institutions occupy those sites. It was that situation in 2013. The Shanghai cement factory was pushed out of the city, and then the government was transforming that site into a cultural area. There's a gap in between, and because human activities stopped for 3 years, weeds grew. It was beautiful. It was very vibrant, and I was really taken by surprise. And I think that really that experience shocked me into seeing, even in cities, we could have a multi-species situation if we just let things grow. So that really changed my art practice from human-centric or anthropocentric to focusing on multi-species relations, in particular with weeds. I also worked with other kinds of plants, but mainly with weeds.
Yeah, I know that you've made a number of eco-queer films, and this idea of botanical sexuality is a very interesting one. Can you elaborate on that? How may this idea challenge our anthropocentric views, for example?
I'm fascinated by human bodies. I think as an artist, like I said, I did portraits. When I was a student, I also spent a semester in Spain. And I traveled around Europe to see great art pieces. And I think as artists, we have always been fascinated by bodies. I also did some performance pieces when I was working with communities. But when I started to work with plants, for a while, I was doing mainly installations, creating live pieces with plants. But then I felt that there is some need for intimacy. You know, of course, when we plant, we are there with plants. But I think that relationship can be brought even closer. So I remember a friend of mine actually said the best way to know someone is through very intimate encounter. So I thought, why not create a situation where I can become even intimate with plants? So the idea is to make a sexual situation. Of course, when I first had this idea to make the film in 2016, it was very difficult for me to explain, right? Because no one has seen something like this. So it really took me some time to convince people to help to realize this project. But once we created the first short film, now it's much easier for people to visualize the situation where men in my film, men and ferns in Taiwan get entangled in a forest. The situation is, for me, it's no longer ridiculous at all, right? For me, it's very natural. And I think for a lot of people who participate in this project, they also, once they get to the forest, once they really see the magnificent plants, it's actually easy to kind of fall in love, to have the desire to become close to plants.
Yeah, I also noticed that your art often references historical records and events. As a contemporary artist and also as a art professor, what do you think of the place of history and earlier human wisdom in contemporary art, or maybe by extension in contemporary life in general?
I think we are living in a very particular moment. I think in my case, I was born in 1974. In these 40 some years, China and also to some extent the world has changed so dramatically, right? So I think we're encountering so many situations where we have very limited time to think. I think looking back into human history, and I think increasingly now in my practice, I'm also looking into Earth history, right? To allow us a longer time frame to perhaps think about our situation with more clarity. When I want to say, sometimes I feel in terms of human history, even though we have been around for a couple million years and our written history has a few thousand years, it's still a very short moment in terms of Earth history, right? So I think now I'm not only looking into human history, but I'm increasingly spending time to learn about Earth history. But it's still I think it's still in process, because I think given the very limited time a human can live on this planet, I think it's such a short moment of our life. We even if we try very hard, it still takes. I think it's very difficult for us to really comprehend the long history of this planet.
Yeah, so I want to bring back, this topic of our current pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And one irony that I see in this current moment is that,
Mm-hmm.
The virus has taken away many precious lives, but it actually really sees no geopolitical boundaries. But on the other hand, how humankind, copes with this pandemic only actually reinforces these very artificial and arbitrary boundaries, right? As we see many countries, nations turn very inward to manage this pandemic. So in your art, you have for a long time advocated for the dismantling of boundaries between nation states, but even more importantly, you know, between human and non-human species. So can you speak to this aspect of your thinking and practice, and maybe relate it to, you know, what we are experiencing now?
I think what I've seen here in this part of the world, and also, you know, to the extent that I can understand through reading news online, the pandemic has been kind of characterized as a health situation. I think based on my experience for the, working as an artist, but also teaching and learning about ecological issues, I think it's what we are experiencing is a crisis of species relations, right? So we have this disruption of a transformed relationship between the human species and this particular virus species, but also there's intermediate species in between. So it's really, I think, like perhaps now more people, this pandemic is part of the larger ecological emergency that we are experiencing. Actually, for a while, I think this pandemic is just more acute and more immediate for many of us. And I think if we really see it as a species relations situation, then, you know, there's no reason not to really think about the planetary situation rather than nation state situation, right? So how can we as a species sort of readjust our relationship with another species if we only focus on nation state issues? That to me is really ridiculous. I think because I worked with weeds, like I said, you know, there's a lot of discussion on invasive species, but also that term is determined by borders that we have artificially erected. For other species, they don't really follow our nation state ideas. And I think that for me, I think it's really important now, particularly during this pandemic, hopefully many of us can really see that the situation as a planetary situation rather than a nation state situation. You know, I just want to say a bit more. I mean, there's a lot of discussion on globalization because of this pandemic. I think it's really the moment for us to think about if we don't want globalization in the economic sense, do we retreat into sort of a nationalist sentiment, or do we find another way to imagine the planetary situation rather than retreating into our national borders?
As you discussed earlier, that socially engaged art has always been a major focus of your teaching, but also practice. What has motivated you, and how does art contribute to social discourses or effect social change?
Like I said, I grew up in the 1970s. You know, I was born in the 1970s. I grew up kind of in the 1980s in Beijing. It's a very socialist experience as I experienced as a child. The sense of equality was still very much present in the social life in China. You know, I didn't have any understanding of money actually until I went to the United States. And I think there's a lot of problems with historical socialist experiments, but I think as an idea, socialism really for me is quite honorable aspiration, you know, building equality among us But now, of course, I think I'm also, in my practice, I'm also thinking about equality, not only among humans, but also among different species. So going back to your question of socially engaged art, I think because of my sort of socialist early experience, I always think artists, it's our role to contribute to a better world. So I don't think it's enough to just create beautiful pieces. I think it's our role to address social issues through artistic means. I think it's, you know, I don't pit myself against activists. I think it's very important to think about how we can actually collaborate with activists, collaborate with social movements to really bring our artistic skills into social situations to really contribute to a social movement. I'm less working solely in social engaged art now, but I bring a lot of the techniques I have accumulated into the ecological practice, into ecological art projects. So I often create workshops. I often want to collaborate with other people, either community members or ecologists, landscape designers, scientists, etc. Because I see art not as something created by a single artist. It's always a collaborative situation. It's always part of the larger movement. So I very much want to embed my project in the larger issue and in a movement.
First, through your education and then through your work as an artist, you have lived and practiced all over the world. How do you see differences in culture impacting your own practice and also the reception of your art and practice?
I think in both socially engaged art and also in ecological art practice, because I'm mainly working now in Asia, there's a cultural difference. I think the idea of activism takes different form in this part of the world. So we often don't have we don't have a long tradition of human rights or animal rights. So the idea of rights is somewhat not so familiar in this part of the world. So I think in US and Europe, a lot of artists work with the idea of rights and work directly in activist forms. I think in this part of the world, I think it's very productive to think about pedagogical situations, to focus on teaching and learning, because there's a strong desire for both artists and audience to learn things. So often social engagement is framed as a teaching and learning situation. And I also think there's a strong tradition to focus on practice in terms of either daily practice or ritualized practice, and also as cultivation and self-cultivation. So it's very important to change the way we live and change the way the world works. So it's not only to focusing externally, but also internally as each person, as an artist or as a participant. How do we really change the way we see the world, and how do we change our daily routines? So that's the cultural difference I see.
Yeah, so finally, we hope that you will make your visit to Smith soon, either in the fall or in the spring semester next year. If you do come, what are some permanent outcomes you would hope to see in our institution as a result of the work you share with us, the workshop, that you would lead here? How would you ideally like our attitudes towards nature be changed by your presence on campus?
First, I want to say, like I said, I really see my role as contributing to a movement, right? So I want to embed my time at Smith in a larger movement. I think there's a lot of momentum in the US, based on what I read, to think about ecological emergency and more specifically on the Green New Deal. So I want to position my project within that larger context. I also see that Smith is thinking about its campus, the master plan of the campus. So I hope my presence there, the workshops, the talks, will somehow contribute to that discussion. I think perhaps as an artist, my role is really to push for a more radical imagination of these issues, right? For example, in the larger issue of the social picture, but also specifically the campus plan, how can we really see the campus as a multi-species space rather than anthropocentric space? How can we really bring, how can we really connect ecological issues and political issues, even in thinking about the campus? So the title of the workshop I have proposed is to imagine eco-socialist garden, right? To perhaps imagine the campus as an ecological situation with multi-species, vibrancy, but also with socialist ideas. Of course, it's an expanded socialist idea. It's an eco-socialist idea. So I hope that can create some lingering discussion. So I don't think, because even, I try to stay there as long as I can, but still it's a very limited amount of time. So the idea is to collaborate with faculty to hopefully plant some seeds, and then these ideas will grow and be realized, not by myself, but by the community.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We hope to welcome you to campus, before long. And last but not least, wish you stay safe and healthy in Hong Kong, and enjoy nature as you can as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been walking every day to see plants and to draw plants. Okay. Yeah, I hope to see you soon. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.